Hello, everyone. I'm Jan Irwin, Head of Education at the Ulrich Museum, and I am absolutely thrilled that you have all joined us in the ether for our very first virtual Writing Now, Reading Now with author Michael Parker. This program tonight is part of our Ulrich virtual series of artist and curator talks, book discussions, and forums that we launched early last summer in response to the pandemic. You can see the full lineup of programs on our newly redesigned website. All are free and easy to register for, and past programs are available to watch on our YouTube channel. And I want to remind everybody that our second Writing Now, Reading Now will be on Sunday, March 2nd at 2 p.m. Again, part of our Ulrich virtual series that you can register for on our website. We reopened our galleries last January, and if you haven't had a chance to see the spring suite of exhibitions yet, they are on view through May 8th, including the 23rd Faculty Biennial, It's All Part of the Process, Gordon Parks' I Too Am America, Renee Stout, Ghosts, and Solving 4X, Sharing Matrilineal Memories at WSU. I want to give a huge thank you to Sam Taylor, Director of the Creative Writing Program and Associate Professor of Creative Writing and Poetry, for coordinating the readings this spring, and to the Creative Writing Program, the English Department, Fairmount College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and Watermark Books for co-sponsoring Writing Now, Reading Now. Did I say March 2nd? I meant May 2nd. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam, for the little note. The MFA graduate reading is May 2nd at 2 p.m. Thank you. So it is my pleasure to welcome Associate Professor of Creative Writing in Fiction, Margaret Daw, who will introduce our special guest this evening. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Jana. Hi, everyone. Those of you who are my students recognize my TV studio. It's the same one you're used to seeing. Michael Parker has published 7 novels and 3 short story collections, with the recent works coming from North Carolina's wonderful Algonquin Books, a press that publishes some of this country's finest literary writing. His latest novel, Prairie Fever, does something hard. It creates the experience of living during another time, and for most of us in another place. I read advice John Updike gave once to writers, cautioning against venturing back in history for setting. He argued it's hard enough to be precise and accurate with the physical and emotional lives of characters when the era is now. But Michael Parker's Prairie Fever changed my mind on that. His subject in that novel is a bollocksed and then smoothed out love story, ranging from Texas to Wyoming, with the central event a blizzard in Lone Wolf, Oklahoma in January 1917. I admire how the writing makes me sure the only conveyance across miles is horse, described as coal black, that someone out too long in the cold would naturally be offered tea spiced with spirits, and the characters matter-of-factly recalling a father winning Oklahoma land in a lottery. I admire how he makes the land a kind of creature among the characters. Here's a bit about when winter turns to spring, and note the movement in the description. It's appealed to many of our senses, and best of all, how it promises something exciting is about to happen. The snowbanks in the fields were broken with patches of brown, first knee-high, dried up corn stalks, and later splotches of mud on the furrows in the roadside pastures. Starlings gathered on the bare branches of the trees, backlit by a sun that turned the remaining snow into white gold. Now let's listen to more of Michael Parker's writing. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Am I unmuted? Yes, okay. Thank you so much, Margaret, for that introduction. And I also want to thank Sam Taylor and everyone else responsible for bringing me here. I was supposed to come last spring, and of course that did not work out. And then I was going to come this spring, and that didn't work out. So, the thing is, I really want to come to Wichita. Um, every summer I drive from Texas up to Montana, and I skirt the western edge of Kansas, like through Garden City, Liberal. I don't know how many of you know that area, but it's just gorgeous. It's really beautiful. And especially to someone who grew up in North Carolina, in a very sort of wooded, swampy part of North Carolina, it really, that landscape really appeals to me. I understand that Wichita is a very different landscape, but I really want to come to Wichita. So I think I'm going to have to change my route this year and go straight up 35 through Wichita, and then take a left in Minneapolis, I guess, and go west, so that I might be able to meet some of you. I want to thank my students. You guys have been terrific. You have really been, you have brought it. And you put up with my terrible handwriting, and my, just weird dislike of the words emit and emanate. I don't know why. I have no idea why I don't like those words, but you put up with my crazy dislike of those words. So I really appreciate all your work. And I am actually going to read from a new novel, which is called, what is it called? Oh, it's called Light of This World. And it's set in East Texas in 1973. And Margaret, I'd never heard that Updike quote, but there were times in the writing of that book where I thought, he might be right, because there was a lot of like looking things up on the internet, and then, or actually making them up and then looking them up on the internet to make sure they worked. Some of which was really fun, and some of which was onerous. So this book is set. It starts in East Texas in 1973, and then it moves to Oregon, and for the last 100 pages, and that part is set in 2019. So I'm just going to read the 1973 part, which I actually realized today is historical, I guess, because it was 50 years ago. But I was alive and kicking, so I know what was on the radio, and I was familiar with those times. So I'm just going to read the first couple of chapters of this novel, and they're pretty short. And so again, it takes place in East Texas, and East Texas is essentially, for those of you who don't know Texas, it's really not the Texas that you see in the movies of like high chaparral and desert. It's more like Louisiana. It's right across the line, Louisiana line, the part that I'm writing about. Chapter 1, Smyrna, Texas, 1973. Because Earl's clothes were line dried, they smelled of sun, grass, earth. But the girls on the bus said he smelled like creek mud. The girls were even meaner in the winter, when he wore parkas donated by the Kiwanis Club Coats for Kids drive, easily recognized by the fake fur collars, which reeked of the kerosene used to heat his house. At home, his family treated him like a second cousin much removed. "Oh, look, Earl," they'd say, after he had been sitting quietly in a room for a half hour. He knew he was creek mud to them too, and so he refused a snack of celery filled with peanut butter and dotted with raisins, because seriously, ants on a log? Into the smoke from neighbors burning their trash in rusty barrels slipped Earl, on the lookout for someone to whom he might define himself. But he always ended up in the woods, listening to the transistor radio his father had given him, or reading aloud from the biography of Leadbelly he carried with him always. His people were proud Louisianans transplanted across the border to Smyrna, Texas. His father was vaguely around. His mother talked all the time to her sisters in Bossier City, installing a 20-foot cord on the telephone so she could sit outside on the front stoop and smoke, and ask her sisters about the fates of various men she might have married instead. Prison, preacher man, career military, meth head, Port Arthur were the answers Earl imagined coming across the line. "Shoo now, Earl," said his mother when she caught him snooping. Earl had two older brothers, Carrie and Larry, identical twins. They were sly and slow-eyed. When they were young, all three boys wore striped t-shirts and crew cuts. Therein ended the likeness. His brothers rode their banana bikes cock-legged, hips jutting as they looped surly circles down the street, talking sideways to each other in a language both unique and precociously foul. They spent most of their time heckling Cedric Drawhorn, who had been beat in the head with a Tommy gun during the Korean War, and thereafter walked the streets shooing imaginary swarms of gnats from his head. Earl liked to believe his family were not bad people. Nobody ever beat him with a garden hose. His brothers were technically juvenile delinquents. They put out the eye of a neighborhood boy with a slingshot and dropped bricks from overpasses onto only Winnebagos, but aspects of their choices could be intriguing. They wore cut-off blue jeans year-round. They sheared off the pant legs in a pattern that impressed Earl, even as he struggled to understand it. His father, when he worked, laid pipe or worked in the oil fields. He claimed to be Acadian, but his mother said he was out of Lawton, Oklahoma. She once told Earl that their last name was assumed, which didn't bother her because Boudreaux sounded better than Miller, which she had spent her first 17 years hating. Wherever his father was from, his brothers and cousins soon arrived in Smyrna, and a compound of trailers and vehicles sanded down to primer or missing bumpers or outright wrecked beyond repair sprung up in the piney woods on the outskirts of town. Earl's father once took him on a walk through the woods to a pond where he taught him the words to "I'm so lonesome I could cry." Even when his father disappeared for weeks, Earl had his transistor radio, on which his father claimed to have listened to stations out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Matamoros, Mexico, when he was a boy in his bed at night. Is there anything in the world more romantic than listening to radio stations from other countries illicitly after lights out? Yeah, there sure was. And Earl came one day to hear it on some old 45 of his father's. Earl couldn't even remember who was singing or about what. He just remembered lying on the floor watching the warped vinyl hiccup. And here came an ample solo of pure pedal steel. Earl felt draped by a blanket and shocked by a cattle prod. For pedal steel both softens and sharpens. Say you're a river. Say there is no wind. Still river equals words set to music written out flat on a page. Now add pedal steel. Wing it in on a westerly breeze. Hear the plaintive shiver of leaves lining trees on the bank. Pedal steel could turn a song into what? Earl didn't know. Your heart struggling to stay in rhythm and burst out of you at the same time. Trying to define it made Earl feel foolish, and this is how he knew it was true. He would die trying, and this is how he knew it was true. Taunted by car honk, Earl walked the outskirts of town, past tire shops that sold only recaps, stores that claimed to repair sewing machines. The air smelled of bacon grease, gasoline, and pine resin. Paths snaked off into the piney woods, beer cans and castaway underpants lining the trail instead of the breadcrumbs of phony fables. On his walks, he would run into street lurkers known only as Moonwalk, Sleepy Tea, Burnt Cheese. Hey ho, Earl, what's the good word? The blue light was my baby, the red light was my mind, said Earl, a line he had heard his father sing while shaving. Often he would see these same men later in his backyard on nights his daddy was in town. They gathered there to listen to music by a leaning shed, its wormy chestnut walls painted by the day's last slant of yellow. They favored what Earl dubbed the negative adjectival. If a man did not have a light, he was one no pack of matches having sapsucker. Earl liked to listen to them argue over what was worse, the subject of what was better being, as far as Earl could tell, beneath them. At some point in the night, they moved on to quote friends who had died young and sassy, and the world turned black and white, and branches in shadow clawed at the walls of the shed, though only Earl seemed to notice. Was he put on earth to notice? He saw a Band-Aid stuck to the bottom of a swimming pool. Once he had seen it, he couldn't not. He saw it in the sky while floating on his back, watching grackles chase each other from the limbs of a live oak to the top of a telephone pole. Between the live oak and the telephone pole, a Band-Aid the size of a jumbo jet, wavy in the manner of items on the bottoms of pools. He saw a grocery cart come not to rest at the bottom of a roadside culvert, and its eternal restlessness did not unnerve him. It was no blight, unlike the music played on the radio, 97% garbage food from a chain store. Nor did the lone shoe in the median bring on a bout of melancholy. Most would consign to this sight only loss, but Earl saw independence, freedom, escape. On his walks, he could, without even trying, find love notes in gutters or dancing leaf-like across lawns. All he had to do was bend to pluck the paper and sometimes scrape dried mud or jelly to read the words. The paper was stiff from having been soaked by what Earl believed to be tears. Here came the sun to dry off and preserve the better part of it. Send it on to Earl. Baby, why you do me like you do me? Darling, are you really only 15? Meet me at the Fiddlers Convention outside Alexandria. As he read them, he heard his aunts recounting the fates of his mother's might-have marrieds. His mother seemed not to understand that her choices were the same as songs on the radio. Other people's messages. He lived to find and collect them in a manila envelope stuck between his bed spring and mattress. As for other people, well, he welcomed their company, but he preferred to watch them climb into their cars and reach reflexively for their shoulder harnesses, buckle themselves safely into their seats, for the rote beauty of muscle memory was proof everlasting that the severed limb could still feel. Hold up, Earl. What's going down? I am the light of this world, Earl said in his head as he nodded. Tell everybody in this world, I am good at stripes. I am good at turnstiles. I can recognize the 4 basic face shapes. I can hum the minor key melodies that accompany movie credits that play in my head. Well, let me ask you this, Earl. The reply was celestial but garbled by passing logging truck. Can you be not good at no and not terribly good at yes? But of course you can if you want to please everybody by going along for the ride, said Earl. Just pat your pockets for your forgotten wallet when the car rolls up to the gas pump. It's chapter 2. Days after they met, Tina would say to Earl, I always think of the month in school when we studied various origin stories from many cultures worldwide. I don't know what month it was, maybe November, because there was rain and leaves falling out of the sky. And I was somehow able to stare outside at the wet leaves sticking to the sidewalk, waiting to be carried away on the bottom of somebody's shoe, and listen to how some Native American tribe believed an eagle dropped the first 2 of them, their Adam and Eve, if you will, into this sacred valley. The valley was in the desert, but it was blue or maybe turquoise with some streaks of silver. I was really getting into it until this girl Sharon raised her hand and said, well, how's that different from the whole stork thing? And the teacher said, well, what stork thing? And Sharon said her mother told her that a stork delivered her and her brother and sister. And the teacher said, well, that's not really an origin story as much as it is a euphemism. And Sharon's mouth fell open in a slack say what position? That was pretty much its normal position. And the teacher took pity on her and said, instead of your mother does not think you are mature enough to know how babies go about getting made, does your mother believe our civilization arose out of stork deliveries? By civilization, she meant the white people of Texas because she was a racist bitch. Her idea of created equal was to let a black or brown kid beat the erasers clean on a tree once a semester. And Sharon said, yeah, she does. Earl and Tina were in the woods, not far from where they had first come upon each other. Deep silence alternated with the gunshots of off-season poachers and the buzzing of illegal sawmills. Tina did not need to spell out what all this had to do with Earl. Earl knew she would not mind switching out their origin story. But Earl treasured the way they came into being because it was so normal as to be unbelievable. One day, Earl was sitting on a log in the woods reading Leadbelly, His Life and Times, when Tina appeared. She was freckly and appeared tall, though it was true that Earl was sitting low on a log. Her hair might have made it to her shoulders had it not twisted away in curlicues that made Earl think of ribbon and also smoke. She was bony. He thought of a line from his other favorite book, Satchmo, the authorized biography of Louis Armstrong, wherein Satchmo described a slender woman as being raggedy as a bowl of coleslaw. And yet Tina glowed with a rare pale energy. "Read me some of that book," she said by way of greeting. Earl read from the section where Leadbelly was freed from prison due to his astonishing musical ability. When he was done, Tina said, "So I know this guy from Brazil, soccer player, only you know what? He calls it football." Earl did not see why, if a famous folklorist discovering raw genius in the cotton fields of Angola prison evoked a memory of a Brazilian soccer player, he ought not to be able to skip the interminably awkward chit-chat he knew was up next and go straight not just to necking, but love. He was planning his move when Tina started telling him about going to see Leon Russell in Houston. There were so many thousands gathered of all walks of life singing Delta Lady. I guess you could say it was really something. She sang into the silence of the woods between gunshots and chainsaws. "Please don't ask me how many times I found you standing wet and naked in the garden." Earl said he would never ask such a question. He did ask her, in an attempted chit-chat, or rather a land speed record at getting such chit-chat out of the way, what scared her. "School nurses," she said. "Cuckoo clocks." Not the most original primal fears, but at least not clowns or spelunking. She sat down beside him on the log and told him to keep on reading, and he did. But the words were delivered as if by Stork, for he was discovering what he always would love about Tina. He could be with her and also elsewhere. For instance, in a sunken field he once passed on the way down to the Gulf, late winter and cloudy, standing water in the furrows of roadside fields, a tractor discs black earth, a string of seagulls in tow. All Tina had to do was be Tina for Earl to remember a booth he favored in a diner at the edge of town. Duct tape covered a rip in the naga hide. The seat cushion was so worn, the spring so long shot, that the space between it and the back of the booth nipped sweetly at Earl's buttocks. Earl shared with Tina his love of pedal steel. Tina said she favored a Hammond organ. "Why?" he asked, and she was ready with the answer, "Because I like to roller skate backwards." Only later did Earl learn she was from Navasota. Her father had sent her to live with his sister in Smyrna after her mother got committed to the state hospital in Austin. That was all he knew about her for the longest time. Talk fell off when they went to kissing on fallen logs by a lake. Earl thought, while kissing Tina, of pressure washers powered by air compressors, and he thought of snowflakes, and he sought a compromise with his lips between the two. Turtles sunned themselves on shore. Their indifference to budding love was annoying and noteworthy. Earl took Tina night swimming. The naga hide of the diner booth snapped at the waistband of his swimsuit. Her skin felt like velvet, but in an oil slick. "What do you see yourself doing in 5 years?" Tina asked Earl as he held her in the dark water. The question put Earl in the mind of outer space. Yet he had some idea of where he would not be at age 22. When he was still in grade school, he had decided that as much as he loved the country, and maybe because he loved the country was no good for him. If you tend toward melancholy, the country, its cornfields raspy in the autumn wind, and its line of woods in the distance beyond the fields, the shadowy mouths of those woods, blood red as the mouths of love singers he had watched on television, contorting with microphones, their love racking their bodies with seizures, wacko love about to strike them dead on stage. The country whispered secrets. According to the country, love was dark and wet and deceitful. But Earl knew love did not tell secrets because it was one. You first, he said, thinking of the far future, the last of his days, which he would spend in some city high-rise reserved for elderly swimmers, with a view of water and of afternoon storms rolling in from the west and lights blinking on at dusk. My friend Alicia goes out with one of the roadies from ZZ Top, said Tina. She said she was going to Houston and get her GED and live in an apartment with Alicia, who didn't have to work because the roadie floated her from his roadie money plus what he made selling pot to high school students, which is how he met Alicia in the first place. I guess I'll get work at a water park, said Tina. But Earl hardly heard her because he had a vision of the future. A ferry crossed the river. It docked at an abandoned shipyard. Tugboats rusted at a tilt, as if listing in surf in waist-high sea oat. Only Earl knew how to get there, by back road. You can come with, Tina was saying. Alicia goes on the road with the band sometimes. In the future, Earl would have no body at all. He would hear the voice of his beloved everywhere, in sirens, the cries of seagulls circling the abandoned shipyard, and he would be without vertebra or even cartilage. He would be a note slurred by a trumpet, muted with a balled up pair of tube socks. But who was this beloved? My father told me Trace Hombres was recorded just up the road in Tyler, said Earl. I think not, said Tina. Maybe not then, said Earl, though he was pretty sure his father would not lie about ZZ Top. He might lie if he had another family in Arkansas, but not about Trace Hombres. I'm glad I'm not scared of things I can't see in the water in the night, said Tina. She pushed herself out of his embrace and swam away. She wanted him to follow, and he did, underwater, his arms extended, pretending to be a school nurse holding a cuckoo clock. But Tina wasn't scared when he grabbed her shins and tugged. When he came up for air, he thought of telling her who he was impersonating, but the moment, it appeared, had passed. And Tina needed to get home to her aunt. Her aunt was respectable and Methodist, and according to Tina, probably lesbian. At the very least, she's a 38-year-old virgin, said Tina. They had dried off and were lying in the sun on a bedspread by the water. My life would open up in astounding ways if only she would take a secret lover. I don't care, male or female, just as long as she has something to do besides me. But why does a lover need to be a secret, Earl asked, thinking of what the Blackmouth Woods had taught him. Love did not tell secrets, being one itself. She couldn't just up and start dating at her ancient age, said Tina. He would have to be married or a she. My mother can't stand her. She never cared for any of my father's people. My mother's from Houston. She eloped with my father against the wishes of her family. Now where are they? He's gone and locked my mother up in the bin. So maybe we can go see her, said Earl. Oh, really, Earl? Can we? Tina said, scooting close. She spoke in the theatrical manner of an actress in a grainy movie from the 40s you could only see on a television set with foil-wrapped rabbit ears when you were homesick from school and there was a lull in game shows. Though his mother loved those movies. The women in them all wore boxy shoulder dresses and wavy hair, and they made his mother cry when they said things at once desperate and vulnerable. Oh, can we please, Tina was saying, would you do that? Would you do that for me? I can borrow a car from a cousin. I have about 23, give or take. Between them, they have enough vehicles to put the Smyrna Christmas parade to shame. Tina said she was familiar with his cousins as well as his crew of oddly named friends. Hold up now, said Burnt Cheese, or maybe it was Moonwalk the first time Earl brought Tina around. There goes our boy Earl, stepping out, stepping up. There had followed elaborate introductions from each, ranging from, "Hey, little mama, I'm pleased to acquaint myself to yourself. They call me Sleepy T, but you can call my hotline anytime," to, "Earl is our special one and only pearl, so go easy now, Tiger Lily, treat him royal," etc. To escape the scrutiny, which Tina did not seem to mind, Earl led her into the house, down the back hallway where he yanked the cord for the folding stairs to the attic. He wanted her to see his safest place, his treasured eaves. Because the attic darkened at its sloped edges, and those edges in their endless shadow suggested to young and lonesome Earl not only the world beyond his world, but the very curve of the earth. He had spent hours here having strange thoughts. That rain was not lyrical, that he would spend his last days in a city high-rise watching the plumes of passing airplanes imitate clouds, that should he live where it snowed and it snowed, he wanted only to think, well, it's snowing, just that, without wondering or caring whether it was a good thing or not. Snow. "Are there any dressmakers' dummies up here?" said Tina. "In movies, old attics like these are full of dressmakers' dummies." "Oh man, I forgot to tell you that Alicia told me about going to this ranch with her roadie boyfriend, some filthy rich dude who hired the band to play his private pool party for like thousands of people. And they all got high, and rich dude took them all up into the top floor of this barn where you're supposed to store hay bales. And it was filled with piñatas hanging from the rafters, and the piñatas were filled with pills." "No way," said Earl, staring at the hypotenuse extending into infinity. "He used to come here hunting silence. If it was not to be found, if his mother was outside yelling into the phone at one of her sisters so loudly it was coming through the vents for the attic fan, if his brothers were downstairs bragging, if the noise of the record player terrorized his quiet, if phone ring, if floorboard creak, if bird song, he waited. And when silence came, it was a showering of cotton balls come to bury him. He'd lay himself down to sleep in it, though he woke always wanting to gargle up some primeval bellow. One day after he brought Tina home several times, his mother found him sitting under a tree with Leadbelly, his life and times. "So where'd y'all meet?" "In the pines," said Earl. His mother sighed her "once I had aspirations" sigh. "I guess that's just what happens when forced to raise children in the wild," she said. "Well, where'd you meet Dad?" "He's just always been there." You knew him when you were little?" "We were little when we got together, if little means how old you are now, which, by the way, that is exactly what little means." "Tina's 18, said Earl. "I like her hair," said Earl's mother, "what she's up to with it and all." "She doesn't believe in blow dryers. Something about carcinogenic." "I don't know, Earl. She seems a little odd." "Baby, I know I can say that to you. I know you won't hate me for it like your brothers would if I were to say something about the trash they string around with, which, why bother? I like her, Earl. But have you noticed that when she speaks, it's like she's all of a sudden been given the lead in some musical, except she can't sing?" Earl said no, but he meant, well, yeah. Or he meant actually she can sing, just off key and a little too loud. His mother said, "I wouldn't know her people because I'm not from this godforsaken town, but who is she?" "She's from Navasota. She came down here to stay with her aunt." "Her parents sent her off? What did she do?" "She didn't do anything," said Earl. "Her mother's in the hospital." "Oh dear, poor girl. I take it all back, except about the hair. A hospital's in Austin. I want to take Tina to see her." "That's nice. Your father seems to like to go to Austin instead of to the oil fields where he's meant to go. I have no idea what he does there, and I don't think I care anymore." "Are you going to leave him?" "Oh, Earl," his mother said, "put down that book for once." Earl held Leadbelly, his life and times, tightly to his chest. It was open to a favorite passage, and he did not want to lose his place. "Listen," his mother said. But she didn't say anything. They sat listening, at first to nothing, and then to trees falling and forest. the thrum of traffic on Interstate 20 an hour north, the faint drumbeat of marching band practice in a Dallas suburb, the squawk of badly played horns ricocheting off buildings and cars. The silence became symphonic. What they heard together was everything in the world beyond the terrifying thump of blood in their hearts. Did you hear? Yes. Just remember, Earl. Thanks so much. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to pose? And if not, then we'll.
Quiet bunch.
They're a quiet bunch tonight. It looks like we may be wrapping it up. Margaret or Sam, would you like to join us for a sec? Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank everyone and thank Michael.
Sure.
And I'm excited to take a peek at your new book.
Thank
Michael,
you.
I just
Yeah.
love the conversation.
I know.
I love the conversations. Like, it's so like the way people don't exactly talk to each other, you know,
Right.
they kind of grab an idea and then I love it. I love it.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, Sam.
And we hope to see you when you reroute yourself through Wichita.
Yeah,
I'll make my presence known.
when might that happen, Michael?
I usually leave when there's 3 or 4 triple-digit days in a row. So probably in a couple weeks. No, I'm just kidding. It usually happens I usually go up there in late May and stay till September. But yeah, probably late May, early June.
Either way, definitely let us know when you're passing through.
Oh, for sure, I will. Yeah, I really want to meet y'all. I want to see Wichita. I feel like every time I'm Zooming with someone, I hear a train. So I feel like there's a lot of trains in Wichita. So I want to see all these trains.
Yeah, we've got trains without question. You know, a couple of questions have popped up while we've been chatting, Michael. Would you want to take them, or should we?
Sure. Yeah. So you want to read them?
Yeah. Kathy asked, she comments, this is so different from Prairie Fever. Did you feel like this was a departure from your last?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's not, I feel like the Prairie Fever in many ways was a very interior novel. It was their various points of view, and this novel was all one point of view. So, and that's, you know, it's been a while since I've written a book and only one point of view. It's been maybe 4 or 5 books, and it was a lot more difficult, just staying with this one person and exploring his consciousness. But then the thing about him, as I wrote, was I just kept discovering, you know, the ways in which he was able to be, as he says, also elsewhere, present here, and also in some other space, and in some kind of dream space, and in some other sort of reality, was just wonderful to play with, and also difficult because you want to ground him in some sort of reality. So things happen later that definitely ground him in some reality. So yes, I felt like it's a huge departure, and also, as Margaret pointed out, it's not set in 1917. So, you know, I lived during the time that it's set, so I didn't have to constantly be Googling things to make sure they're true. Although, you know, you forget what happened. You sort of forget what music was on the radio in 1973. But fortunately, I kept all my albums, so I could just go look and see what's on the shelf. So.
Well, and along that, Keith Cushman asked, well, it says, great to see and hear you, Michael. How far along is the novel?
First of all, Keith is a native Kansan, and I'm gonna mispronounce this, but I think he's Salina.
Salina.
Yes, I got it right. Yes. So, and he's an old friend from North Carolina. I finished the novel and I've done several drafts and I sold it and it's coming out sometime next year. So I don't know that we've quite settled on the title. So that, but this is a working title. This is the third or fourth title. Yeah.
Exciting. We have another question that asks, where do you find most of your inspiration?
Often it comes from an image. I'm trying to think where what this novel came from. I think it came from, oddly enough, it came from seeing a Band-Aid on the bottom of a swimming pool, which is something that Earl sees, and in the way in which Earl's kept, as soon as he sees it, he can't not see it. And so I began to think about the things that one sees that are just completely mundane, to which we attach a great deal of significance. And then I had started the story set in a 4-H camp in Texas with this kid named Earl, who had two brothers who terrorized him, which happened to me, although it's my brother and sister terrorizing me at a 4-H camp in North Carolina. So it kind of, stories come from all kinds of different places, and you just, so I'm sure poems are like that too. The poems that I've written, I just take this, and when it's not working, you put it with this and make it into something else. So there are all kinds of different things coming together. And from music, I get a lot of inspiration from music. Like for this book, it was Leadbelly, of course, Robert Johnson, a sort of 70s era Rolling Stones, and some other things. Yeah, Louis Armstrong. Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps it up for us. I want to thank you again, Michael, and thank everyone out there who joined us this evening. And hopefully we'll see you again on May 2nd. And Sam and Margaret, thank you. And everybody have a lovely evening.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you, Michael.
Sure thing.